On paper, this war looked like an easy win for the British, but against all odds, the Redcoats found themselves struggling against the ragtag Continental Army. They deployed their absolute best commanders to the front lines, yet on American soil, the British suffered massive casualties, pushing them to the very brink of disaster. The mighty British Army stuck in a nightmare against an amateur force, and then something shocking happened, almost as if to mock the empire. It was a historic turning point that finally glued the 13 colonies together into one united force. So, is this it? Is the British Army about to crumble without even putting up a real fight? But as the Congress met, there was a massive elephant in the room. The delegates couldn't actually agree on why they were fighting this war in the first place. Basically, the room was split down the middle. One side asked, "Do we want total independence?" While the other asked, "Or do we just want our rights back and stay loyal to the crown?" You had the heavy hitters like John and Samuel Adams, along with Virginia's Richard Henry Lee, pushing hard to break away. On the flip side, John Dickinson from Pennsylvania was practically begging for reconciliation with Britain. Here's the thing. At first, most colonists weren't actually looking to start a new country. They just wanted to fix their grievances within the British Empire. Remember, Britain was the global superpower back then. Going it alone was a terrifying idea. Without the protection of the Royal Navy, the strongest in the world, how would they possibly survive Atlantic trade? And it wasn't just the ocean. They had French and Spanish colonies breathing down their necks right there in the Americas. Could they really fend off France, Spain, and Native American tribes without British backup? That's exactly why so many folks opposed independence. They wanted to cut a deal, secure some self-rule, and stay safe under the British umbrella. But just 1 year into the war, public opinion took a massive U-turn. Britain started recruiting Native Americans, enslaved people, and even German mercenaries to fight us. That enraged the colonists, and when the Crown blockaded our ports and flat out refused to talk, that's when people realized independence is the only option left. But the people still needed a push. Enter the game changer, a thinker who had just arrived from England named Thomas Paine. He'd been in America for less than 2 years, but in January 1776, he dropped a pamphlet called Common Sense, and this one little book completely flipped the script for everyone who still wanted to stay loyal to Britain. He didn't hold back. He argued, "For centuries they've lied to us that the king can do no wrong." He pointed out that whenever the government oppressed the people, the king's advisors took the blame, while the king himself remained untouchable, a symbol of justice. That is absolute nonsense, Paine declared. He argued that kings rule by force, not right. He even called George III a royal brute who simply demands submission to satisfy his own cruelty. He went on to say, "I've seen America, and it is the last refuge of mankind." He believed this land was the only hope for realizing true freedom and equality. He invoked the idea of a city upon a hill, a special nation that the whole world would look up to. His conclusion was simple. Breaking away from Britain's brutal system isn't just politics. For any true American, it is simply common sense. From that moment on, the idea of American exceptionalism, that we are special, took deep root in the American psyche. Get this, the population was only 3 million back then, yet Common Sense sold 500,000 copies. In today's terms, that is absolutely viral. By early 1776, the tide was turning fast. Even the legends we now call the Founding Fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Patrick Henry, they were all captivated by Paine's words. As summer rolled in, the Continental Congress appointed a committee to draft the official statement. They actually voted for independence on July 2nd, but the truly historic moment, the one we all remember, happened 2 days later, on July 4th. Representatives from the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia to formally adopt the Declaration of Independence. This document was the final seal of approval, justifying the bold step they had taken just 48 hours prior. Now let's break down the two most critical parts of this document. First, the philosophy. All men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It states that governments exist solely to secure these rights, deriving their power from the consent of the governed. And if any government destroys these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Second, it lists the crimes of the king. It accuses him of violating the social contract and conspiring against the colonies behind Parliament's back. It concludes that these colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. It declares them absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, dissolving all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain. This is without a doubt the most important document in American history. It's why we celebrate Independence Day on the 4th of July. And from that moment on, we weren't just colonies anymore. We became states. While Thomas Paine was busy firing up the colonies with common sense, the British High Command came to a realization. Boston was a tactical nightmare. Think about it. Boston was the hotbed of the rebellion. Anti-British sentiment was off the charts there. Plus, geographically, it was too easy to get trapped and surrounded. Defending it was a lost cause. So, on March 17, 1776, they pulled the plug. The British Army, along with hundreds of loyalists, packed up and evacuated to Halifax, Nova Scotia. But don't think for a second that they gave up. They just regrouped. By the summer of '76, a massive armada appeared off the coast of New York, hundreds of ships and 32,000 troops. New York was the perfect staging ground. Its deep harbor played right into the hands of the mighty Royal Navy. Plus, capturing it meant they could slice the colonies in half, separating the North from the South. And if that wasn't scary enough, they brought in the heavy hitters, the Hessians, about 8,000 terrifying German mercenaries sent over to crush the rebellion. These weren't just random soldiers. In European warfare, Hessians were elite killing machines, right up there with the Swiss Guard. They were the best money could buy. General William Howe was so confident with this massive force that he gave the Continental Congress an ultimatum: surrender now and get a royal pardon, or face total annihilation. The British were absolutely sure they had this in the bag. But wait, there's another layer to this mess. Just before this showdown, the Continental Congress made one of the biggest blunders of the entire war: the failed invasion of Quebec, Canada. Washington tried his best to turn his ragtag militia into a real army, but that disastrous northern campaign cost him dearly. He was left with only 19,000 men, and to be honest, about 4,000 of them were too sick or wounded to even hold a musket. It looked like a suicide mission on paper, yet they chose war and declared independence anyway. General Howe saw this as the perfect chance. He wanted to crush Washington's army right there and kill the spirit of the Declaration before it could even spread. So, Washington is cornered. How on earth is he going to survive this? He dug in on Long Island, specifically Brooklyn, right across from Manhattan. He positioned his troops with the East River at their backs. It was risky, but he was betting on a repeat of the Bunker Hill strategy: hold the high ground and bleed the British dry if they dared to attack. Long Island has a natural ridge running through its center like a spine. Washington used this as a shield. There were only 4 ways through this ridge: 3 passes and a coastal road. He split his forces to plug these gaps, keeping a reserve force in the back just in case. On paper, it was a solid plan, but in reality, a disaster waiting to happen. The Continental Army had never coordinated a defense this complex before. Washington didn't know his officers well enough to predict who would crack under pressure. Basically, he was flying blind. And then, inevitably, someone dropped the ball. A massive blunder happened in the eastern sector at a place called Jamaica Pass. It was a crucial gateway into Brooklyn, yet they defended it with, get this, only 5 guards. The British played it perfectly. They pinned down the front lines with feints, then swung their main force right through that empty Jamaica Pass. The American flank collapsed instantly. But over on the west, General Sterling's men fought like lions, holding the line for over 2 hours to buy time. In the chaos, Washington scrambled to rally his troops at Brooklyn Heights for a last stand. But let's be honest, the defense was crumbling. So, was it a total victory for the British? Surprisingly, no. At the critical moment, General Howe hesitated. Under the cover of a thick fog, some call it a miracle, about 9,000 American troops slipped silently across the East River into Manhattan. Howe eventually followed, but he moved too slowly. By the time he got there, Washington was gone. Howe's problem was that he was too cautious. He was obsessed with minimizing his own casualties. Thanks to that hesitation, Washington, despite a crushing defeat, managed to escape capture and save his army from total annihilation. If Howe had just pushed harder, even if it cost him more men, he could have crushed the trapped Continental Army or captured Washington. That would have ended the war right there. It's ironic. At Bunker Hill, they took the ground but lost too many men. Here, he needed to sacrifice men to destroy the enemy, but he refused. He played it safe, like an accountant, not a general, choosing a victory that looked good on paper but failed to win the war. Despite the escape, the British succeeded in their main goal. They kicked the rebels out of Long Island and forced them to abandon Manhattan. They chased Washington's army all the way across the Jersey Plains, over the Delaware River, and into Pennsylvania. The British settled into winter quarters at a Hessian outpost in Trenton, New Jersey. Now, if you know anything about winters there, you know it gets brutal. We're talking sub-zero wind chills. Back then, armies didn't fight in that weather. They hibernated. But Washington wasn't hibernating. Christmas night, 1766, he leads his ragged men back across the frozen Delaware, catches the Hessians completely off guard, and takes Trenton. This was the Battle of Trenton, the moment Washington's grit and genius truly shined. You have to understand how desperate things were. Before this, the Continental Army had been losing non-stop. Morale was non-existent. Washington had barely 5,000 men left in Pennsylvania, while General Howe had 12,000 troops nearby and another 20,000 waiting in New York. The army was on the verge of collapse. If the river froze solid, the British could just walk across and wipe them out. Worse, enlistments were set to expire on December 31st. In just a few days, Washington wouldn't have an army left to command. It was do or die, so Washington made a bold gamble. He realized they couldn't win a fair fight with muskets, so he decided, we'll beat them with firepower. He gathered nearly all his artillery for one massive all-in strike on Trenton. On Christmas night, he split his army into 3 columns to cross the river, but the weather was a nightmare, a nor'easter blizzard. 2 of the columns failed to make it across. Only Washington's group, about 2,400 men, managed to reach the other side. But maybe luck or destiny was on his side. They marched 9 miles in the snow, seized the high ground at Trenton, set up those cannons, and unleashed hell on the surprised Hessians. That victory changed everything. Soldiers re-enlisted for another 6 weeks. They defended their ground and then marched on to Princeton, kicking the British out of the college there. It was a miracle combination of guts, tactics, and pure luck. That moment, Washington standing in the boat amidst the ice, was immortalized in a massive 21-foot painting. It hangs in the Met in New York today, the ultimate symbol of the American Revolution. But the war wasn't over. Could they keep this momentum alive, or was the empire about to strike back harder than ever? Find out in Part 2.